think AWS has made a lot of progress, and I think they have a much more nuanced opinion about how they help open source projects, and I for one, appreciate it a lot.
Welcome to Screaming in the Cloud. I'm Corey Quinn, and I figure it's time to kick an open source beehive. My guest today is Madelyn Olson, who is one of the maintainers of Valkey, which you may know as being a more popularized historically through its proprietary fork known as Redis. Madelyn, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's exciting to be here and talk about my favorite topic, open source.
This episode's been sponsored by our friends at Panoptica, part of Cisco. This is one of those real rarities where it's a security product that you can get started with for free, but also scale to enterprise grade. Take a look. In fact, if you sign up for an enterprise account, they'll even throw you one of the limited, heavily discounted AWS Skill Builder licenses they got, because believe it or not, unlike so many companies out there, they do understand AWS. To learn more, please visit panoptica.app/lastweek in AWS. That's panoptica.app/lastweek in AWS. Oh, yes. I do want to give a little backstory because it turns out that there are people in this industry who don't spend their entire time on the internet reading about open source project drama and license changes and the rest. The high level, for the recap at the beginning of the episode, for those who don't remember what last season held for us, effectively, there was an open source project. It was called Redis. It got very popular. A company called Garantia Labs was a service provider around it, wound up becoming Redis Labs, hired the creator of Redis for a few years, bought the copyrights to it, and this year, recently, wound up doing a license pivot so that it is source available, citing that Amazon was going to launch a Redis clone and destroy them, so they're not going to be allowed to do that anymore. Have I nailed the salient points?
Yeah, that was the high level points that are important to hit.
My observation on this is it's a bunch of lunacy. I think Amazon makes a convenient boogeyman. And we should probably point out as well that by day you are a principal engineer at AWS, where you work on you work half the time, I think. How does it actually work? I know that you're historically ElastiCache, which needs to be rebranded for ElastiCache for Valkey. Like, I don't care what proprietary fork it was named after. Make it Valkey.
Yeah, so my day job historically was working on Amazon ElastiCache, which used to be the managed in-memory cache provider with compatibility with Redis and Memcache. I got started on working on Redis open source about 6 years ago in 2018. So since then, about half my time has been on open source, and the other half has been on the managed service.
I want to point out as well that first you have ElastiCache, which is a for sale implementation of Valkey. Great. You folks also sell MemoryDB, which is less beloved for a variety of reasons, but it's the less in-memory, more persistent data store version of Valkey. And I don't know what these people are worried about. You're going to launch a third service that's going to try to compete with them? Oh, good heavens. The community has overwhelmingly gone in the direction of Valkey when the fork was announced. The Linux Foundation has given you folks a home, as I understand it. And it is now something that this is effectively a schism in the community, except the only people really on their side of this seem to work for the company called Redis.
Right. So, before the schism happens, there was 5 maintainers of the Redis project. 2 worked for non-Redis companies. So there was me from AWS and a guy named Zhao from Alibaba. And then there were several other very major contributors from companies like Ericsson, from Google, and from Huawei. There's also a very important contributor from Tencent. And all of these folks all just kind of went with Valkey. None of them wanted to continue working on a source available database. So, everyone's sort of on this Valkey train now.
I have to back up here because in 2024, I think the question has to be asked, does open source still matter the way that it once did?
Open source definitely matters. Open source is the place to solve problems that, it doesn't make sense for all the different managed, large software companies to solve independently. The reason that Redis was working so well as an open source group is, AWS was willing to come to the table and say, hey, we have this feature we'd like to build in the open source and everyone can have it. And then we can have it in our managed service. You see this play out all over the place. I take a lot of inspiration from the Postgres community, which is a lot of the same thing. A lot of big tech companies all come in and contribute their features, and it benefits everyone. Like, there's still a lot of value in this. It's pretty hard for a company to come in and say, hey, we're going to build this thing proprietary better than the rest of the world can build it as a community. I really think these open groups are historically pretty good at building certain types of open source of software products. of which I think databases is one of them.
I think that there have been a few things that have been conflated across the board. The first is that open source has been mistaken for a business model by a bunch of folks. And two, it was assumed originally, which made sense at the time, that, oh, well, we're the folks that built this software. Clearly, we're the ones best positioned to operate and run it for folks. Well, cloud providers have turned that a bit on its head. And I can understand on some level it feels galling when work you have done effectively volunteering for now is being turned around and sold for a profit, and you see absolutely none of it other than representatives of that company showing up in the various community areas to make borderline demands about feature requests and whatnot. That can be irksome. I get it. But I don't think that Amazon did anything wrong in this case. I have a litany of things I think Amazon does wrong, in case anyone is thinking I'm somehow shilling for the company here. But this isn't one. The licenses have been very clear. Open source means that any person or entity can take, use, and in some cases have to contribute the code back. There's no carve out for except for these types of companies, because that's not how it works. That's no longer open.
Yeah, and that's really in the spirit of open source. Like, sometimes we just talk about open source as licensing, but there's also like free as in freedoms, open source. That's the thing. Anyone can go take the software and do whatever they want with it. And we see a lot of good come out of these very free open source projects. And I don't think a lot of this would have happened if Redis had originally launched as not a very liberal open source license. A lot of the reasons it's become so popular is people can take it, modify it a bit to solve their specific use cases, and build it as a product, build it as a project, like build as whatever they want. So, to your point, like that's why open source works so well. It's like people can do whatever they want with it. So it makes sense that people would kind of feel bad about, people doing not exactly what you want with it, but you're right. That's what the license is for.
An open source project is not a for-profit entity. It is not built with the idea of how do we monetize this thing directly. If you want to start something like that, it's usually called a company. And the fact that, oh, well, we've now done this thing, how do we turn it into money, is not really a problem for the open source world, though it's increasingly becoming one with a lot of these license forks. I do not believe that these companies are doing anything illegal. I am not a lawyer. Talk to one, please. This is not legal advice, my God. But they're not doing anything even morally wrong necessarily by switching these licenses over, but they are violating an unspoken social contract that has historically existed. And I know that when a company does something like that, but they have other stuff that is open, I am a lot less likely to contribute to any of those things going forward. If it has a CAL, one of those contributor authorization licenses, I forget the exact acronym.
CLA, Contributor License Agreement.
The CLAs, yes, the contributor license agreements, you sign copyright over and the rest. And it's, okay, at this point, this feels too much like work and you can start paying me to do it. Now, I am not a good developer. Frankly, that's a feature, not a bug. Oh, Corey won't contribute to the project if we do this. Where do we sign up? Not really the direction I'm trying to take it in, but that's something that I think is going to have a chilling effect on the next generation of things. I don't volunteer for for-profit entities, and I don't let people volunteer for mine. I am curious about Valkey and the governance model going forward. You work at AWS, obviously, and I am sympathetic to the viewpoint that, well, Amazon is the worst possible spokesperson for open source good behavior. But and I think a lot of the criticisms that were levied at Amazon, well, yeah, it doesn't feel great when the multi-trillion-dollar company is monetizing everyone else's work as services. They have started doing a lot of the work over the last few years to the point where those accusations feel increasingly dated. What I find curious is when I start talking to random folks who are working on open source projects of varying sizes, they'll say, oh yeah, we're getting sponsored by AWS. They're just giving us a bunch of credits to run the infrastructure for the project and the rest, or they're having developers contribute stuff to it. Amazon has never been particularly good at telling its own story. Their marketing mumbles. So, and I don't know how to fix that other than every time we give $1,000 to a project, we're going to spend $10,000 more telling the world that we did it, which is sort of the wrong behavior pattern as well. So I am sympathetic to this, but I want it to be clear, since I've done some digging into this, that I assure you I would not be saying this were it not true. Valkey is not an AWS project. They are sponsoring the project in the form of, I don't know, paying your salary to work on this thing. But they have no ownership rights. Those have been given to the Linux Foundation, which is a separate kettle of debate we can have a different time. They're doing the right thing here, as best I can tell.
Honestly, I'm really happy with the way AWS has been enabling the Valkey project. as you said, they're primarily sponsoring it through, supporting me so that I can spend my entire time on the project. I mentioned earlier, I spend about half my time on Redis. I spend all of my time on Valkey. And they've also been doing a lot of the right things with helping us get to we visited the open source summit in Seattle recently. They helped provide the mechanics that we could show up. And they were very good at taking a step back and being like, hey, this isn't an AWS project. We're just helping you get into the room. As you said, this is a Linux Foundation project. This is not an AWS fork. AWS does not own the IP or any of the licensing. This is all in the Linux Foundation, which is a non-for-profit company or organization to help open source projects. Valkey is an open source project and is very much community driven. There is a 6-member technical steering committee, of which only one person is from AWS, myself. And they're doing a really good job just, being there to help the community, but not trying to step in and direct the community and telling it what to do. And you're definitely right that I think AWS has made a lot of progress. And I think they have a much more nuanced opinion about how they help open source projects. And I for one, appreciate it a lot. I'm only working at AWS because of the way they've helped me work on open source projects.
I have to ask this question because I feel like it almost becomes counterproductive at some point when companies do it. But every open source project that goes through one of these license switches, there's been a smell around the project for years beforehand, before that shift happens. And what that manifests as to me is when there are a number of features that are not brought into the open source project because they would explicitly compete with one of the sponsoring company's financial goals. And I think there's an analytics offering for Valkey, or for Redis technically, which has never been open sourced as a result, as one example of this.
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of features that people have asked for from Redis that we got a lot of pushback from, because there was a technical steering committee. We got a lot of pushback because they, officially the comment was, oh, it's too complicated. We don't want it. But it's possible that was part of the reason, this sort of pushback from the corporate competition. And I can say that now with Valkey, it will become much easier to contribute a lot of these big, exciting features. One of the big things we're working on is, active-active replication, which was a big feature that people asked for Redis that got pushed back from. There's also a lot of interest in a lot of the extensibility stuff that Redis had, like JSON support, like search support. And we are engaging with the community to figure out, what's the best way to build that? How do people want that? And we're trying to, make the Valkey project more of what we think the community really wants it, in a way that, the Redis community didn't want to.
I am personally excited about the active replication piece. In my last real job 7 years ago now, the one time that I got paged on a weekend because I care very much about not having my family time disrupted was due to an ElastiCache challenge, where I don't believe there was anything that AWS themselves had done, but we were pointing at one of the replica members instead of the virtual IP post maintenance. Then there was a changeover where, time to take that. You folks took the thing down for maintenance, which you're entitled to do. And suddenly you could no longer send writes to that thing, which meant that a whole bunch of stuff that we had broke. Now, there were a number of contributing factors to this, but on some level, if we just had the one endpoint we could have pointed to that always would have been this is where writes always go and reads, and it's fine. It feels like that would have solved some of the problem. Even if we'd point to a cluster member, if everything can take writes, that would have been glorious. Past me would have appreciated it.
I will say Valkey cluster, the topology discovery should enable you to figure out what the correct writer is, even if you're talking to the wrong node. So it sounds like you were using the old Valkey standalone type of configuration.
This was 2015. So it was one of the 2015, 2016, and it was on a older version that was running in ElastiCache. The details have escaped me. Again, there were many of misconfiguration that were done internally. This was not something I'm blaming you folks for. Like any reasonable issue, there are going to be a number of contributing factors to it. It's not, Ted was dumb. Ted is always going to be dumb. How do you make sure that one person being dumb doesn't cause larger challenges?
Oh, I fully agree. And I will say, so at 2015, that was about the time that Redis released cluster mode, which does solve this problem. But as you said, at the time, you probably weren't using it. So today, hindsight, even hindsight, it wasn't really production ready yet.
No, I would argue most of my code has never become production ready, but that's a separate argument and, personal attacks. I found myself. Do you find it strange to be effectively spending all of your time doing open source work that is done in the public eye, while having a full-time job at a company? Because every time I've done stuff like that, when I've been have more normal jobs than this, and I spent significant amounts of time working on open source projects, it felt like I was slacking off somehow. Like I may as well have been playing World of Warcraft or something as far as my boss was concerned. Now, these are different times, and AWS is a more enlightened company than that, and clearly you're not doing something wrong here. But does it ever feel weird to you?
I think it used to feel weird. It took me a long, like I got into the Redis community trying to contribute TLS. And so at the time, there was alignment between what AWS wanted and what the open source community wanted. And so I've always found that to be like the secret sauce to being able to work a lot in open source. You just have to convince, the leadership, like, hey, contributing to open source is aligned with your business interests. And then it becomes so much easier to just kind of go work in open source because, the original thinking was the better that Redis was, the better Amazon for ElastiCache for Redis was. And the same is true going to be about Valkey. We want Valkey to be as good of a product as possible because AWS has indicated their intent to support it. And we would like to make it as good of a product as possible. So, I also I work a lot. I'm a workaholic. I work like 50 hours a week, but I try to, during 9 to 5, I try to make sure I'm working on the important parts, like the real job stuff. And then the other 10 hours, I spend a bunch of time, making off-brand Valkey stickers, which, is part of the important for the community, but maybe not exactly the top priority for Amazon.
Few things are better for your career and your company than achieving more expertise in the cloud. Security improves, compensation goes up, employee retention skyrockets. Panoptica, a cloud security platform from Cisco, has created an academy of free courses just for you. Head on over to academy.panoptica.app to get started. The wisdom that I heard from someone somewhat recently, which I wish I'd heard decades ago, was that if you're one of those people that can't walk away from work, make sure that the things you do outside of the core hours are things that give you energy and that you really enjoy doing, because otherwise it just becomes miserable.
I follow that to a T. Like outside, as soon as 5 o'clock rolls around, well, a little bit earlier, I'm a morning person. But as soon as 4 o'clock rolls around, I kind of go read esoteric database papers about improving hash table performance by 2%. That's what makes me happy.
That would be significant at scale.
It would be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking to someone who, honestly, one of the most valuable things that I do for the business from time to time is fire up my Twitter client, which is insane, but also true. I have to ask though, my negative reaction to Redis going source available instead of its historical open source roots, has been negative, but that negative reaction has been largely emotional, which is usually not a reason to go ahead and do various business things. So from a more objective perspective, other than offending my personal sense of rightness here, why did you create Valkey?
As I said, alluded to a little bit earlier, the Redis community had been very technologically conservative. They've been very slow moving. They didn't want to implement a lot of features. They were very hesitant to increase the number of maintainers to allow for more contributions. And there's actually a very big backlog of features like the active-active replication we talked about that no one was really contributing. And now that we have Valkey, I'm very intent to sort of grow the number of maintainers. We have a lot of contributors. We've had, 52-ish total contributors so far to Valkey in the last 2 months. And we're hoping that we're going to have a much higher velocity of development. And, as I said, a lot of the major contributors moved from Redis to Valkey. And that's where we really see our differentiation kind of coming along. We have a lot of features planned. We're planning on building significant performance improvements, things that Redis has long said they don't really want to mess too much with. We also have big improvements to stability and reliability. We also want to build all those extensions we talked about. We think there'll be a lot of functionality. And the other thing is just it's going to be sort of we're hoping for it to become basically the standard, right? There's a huge amount of support from other companies. We have so many supporters of Valkey, like Ivan and Percona and GCP and Oracle and Heroku and Ericsson. There's all these companies coming behind it.
And these are companies that normally do not collaborate much on things. They are, I don't know what the corporate equivalent of sworn blood enemy is, but they're that.
Correct. Yeah. They're not a typical company that like to get together. And so we're really hoping all of that will come together to be a better product. And at the end of the day, that's what people want. They want something that works well, that's highly available, that's highly performant. That's what Valkey is going to be.
Yeah. One of the ways I've always viewed it has been that if I'm working on something that other people can take advantage of in their workplaces, terrific, great, awesome. I have nothing against open source. At some point, though, if I'm starting to implement things specifically for you and your use case, okay, great. Now it's time to probably pay me to do those things, because at that point, it is no longer something that benefits everyone. It's something that benefits you individually. I periodically find developers behind open source projects that I'm using if I need something specific done for me, and I'll pay them for that thing. But invariably, as that happens, there will be pull requests made to the upstream project. And sure enough, a lot of those things get baked in. And this is a great thing. Like, I feel like sometimes they're surprised that I take that perspective. It's no, if I'm sponsoring upstream development from this, terrific. Or if you're doing it separately, great. That's fine too. Please keep going. That's the whole reason that we have an open source culture. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. In fact, you're one of those giants for a lot of people now, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Like like one of the reasons that I'm an engineer, I'm an introvert. I don't, I like talking with people, but if I could have my way, I'd be hiding most of the time. But we're trying to find people like that, people that, want to contribute to Valkey. And like, if you have these things that, if someone's proposing, a minor improvement that's very specific to a niche use case, we'll probably still accept it. We still want it. Someone else somewhere in the world probably, would also like that improvement. So that's what I really love about open source is there's all these, individual niche things that sort of come together to just be better than the sum of their parts.
One of the challenges I've had with open source, and one of the reasons I stepped away from a lot of it, has been the unsettled expectation that everyone has on it. For example, of great, well, I'm using this in production for my business, and there's a problem with it, so you wake up and fix it immediately. That's not a great attitude to take toward these things, for one. And for another, it really does become this obnoxious thing where you have so many folks who are, I guess, caught up in a variety of different challenges and going on. It always seems like it's a PTA meeting when it comes to open source governance, where everyone's arguing with each other constantly. It becomes more work to keep the project functioning than it feels like value is getting derived from it from time to time. And that's usually my cue that when I start feeling like that, it's time to walk away. How do you avoid that problem? Because clearly you're still way into it and I have backed so far away. People are often surprised to learn I have a history with open source.
I am a very tenacious person. So the history with me and TLS that I mentioned earlier, like that was my big contribution. It took me 2.5 years to get TLS into open source Redis. And that was just because I'm a very stubborn person. Like I am gonna keep trying to make something work. And, I've had a lot of frustrations with getting stuff into the Redis open source after the transition to the open governance. And, Valkey's only been going along 2 months and we are still a little bit in the honeymoon phase where like everything is great because we have all these features we want to build. Everyone's sort of like, we have all these things and everyone kind of all agrees these are good things, but we're trying to build a system so that it works well in the long term. We have a contributor summit that's going to be next week, June 6th and the 7th, where we're going to get all of the kind of core maintainers together, a lot of the major contributors together. And we're trying to, get all together to figure out like, how do we make this a project that's maintainable for the long term? And I don't have a lot of answers right now. I mentioned, before we started chatting that I'm actually at pgconf.dev to sort of figure out how Postgres is sort of, not tearing itself apart. And I'm still not entirely sure how we're going to not tear ourselves apart, but I'm hopeful. Like I believe that if you are willing to lean in and invest in an open community, that you will get returns back from it. It's just sort of the thing you have to kind of have some faith for. And I guess I'm just an eternal optimist, and I'll keep hoping that it will work out well. And it's worked out well so far. So I'm gonna just keep hoping.
One last question I have for you on this, and if you can't answer it, I completely understand that. But I have to imagine that there is some sort of internal process that winds up taking whatever the latest released version of Valkey is and turning it into ElastiCache. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen to Amazonify the service. There's probably a security review, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just a press the deploy button, go to lunch, and assume everything is great. How do you separate out whatever hooks into the upstream project would make a lot of that stuff easier for your employer from what you're doing on behalf of the project? Not necessarily that there are inherent misalignments there, but there's always going to be a choice at some level of, do we do this in the way that's easier for the community versus easier for Amazon themselves? Do you have a framework for that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's normally when people say they're like wearing two hats. So like I have my Amazon hat and I have my open source hat. And I try to just make it very clear that when I'm stating an opinion, it's for one of those two like positions. When I'm accepting something as a maintainer for Valkey, I'm wearing my open source hat. Be like, is this a good contribution for the project? And I'll make it clear that when I'm advocating for a feature in open source to the other maintainers, that I'm saying, hey, on behalf of AWS, this is a feature I think would be useful. And in an abstract sense, that's this pipeline you talked about, makes Amazon a customer in a sense. We like to talk about customer obsession. We're a customer of the open source project. So we do have a valid claim to be like, hey, we would like this feature. And so do all the other IT vendors that have Redis services or hopefully soon Valkey services, and they can go say the same thing. We were talking a bit recently in open source how there's, a certain type of manageability that would be nice to have. And all the managed services were like, yes, we'd all kind of like this functionality. And even though it's, pretty much a managed service specific feature, it's still, since everyone's still willing to sort of like work and it's like the community buys into the feature, it still, works out well. So as long as you're just making that distinction very clear, I haven't had too much issue, with people being concerned that I'm like pushing something on behalf of AWS or not.
I do confess to having been surprised to have learned throughout this drama unfolding that ElastiCache is based on the open source code base. What I guess what I had assumed is that on some level, when you operate at a point of scale that Amazon does, where you no longer really need to have all of the affordances for all the disparate operating environments that an open source project might get used within, because you can control all of that. It's similar to my criticism historically of Amazon crowing about Graviton for RDS. It's like, it's a SQL endpoint. As long as you respect the SQL API and return the results that it expect within a price performance window, I don't care if it's Intel, Graviton, Magic Elves, or whatever else is under the hood. Just make it work. I just want the behavior to be fine. It could be a black box beyond that. I don't know whether it's the actual open source upstream database engine or a complete reimplementation of it in ways that create the same results but take advantage of existing substrates within AWS itself. I was surprised to learn that it is largely the open source thing that you would expect, running with relatively minor modification.
I don't know if I have much to say about that. It's true.
No, sorry. I don't mean to put you in a position where you can't, but I was very surprised just from the perspective of why would AWS care about this was where it led me to. And it's no, because we do use the open source thing. That is important to us. And I've talked to a number of engineers, not just you, for whom the open source aspect is incredibly important. And it's one of the reasons they work at Amazon.
I mean, the open source Redis product was pretty good. It solved a lot of our use cases. And so, we found it beneficial to use within our managed service. The more you basically diverge away, like if you have to re-implement an open API with a proprietary system, it takes a lot of effort to maintain. Like every time there's a new piece of functionality, it might kind of break the way that you're thinking about the service. And so there's a lot of benefit to just staying very current to open source. If you're basically providing like an API compatible endpoint as a service.
Yeah, an API compatible always needs an asterisk next to it. Every time I talk to a company that says, oh yeah, we are 100% S3 API compatible, are you really? I'm betting you're not. And they're like, yes, we are. And then a quick run of a test suite later shows, no, you are not. And you need to be bug for bug compatible. You need to be able to support really weird things that no one knows exist. And the fact that you're not in most of those cases is fine, but be upfront about where those divergences are. I honestly should have figured this out years ago, just because either you are using a lot of these open source things directly, or you have a preternaturally good reimplementation team. Let's reimagine this and make sure all these weird behaviors work exactly the same way at scale. I wish that people were that dark wizardry there, but in practice, nope, I don't think so. I think it's just what you see is pretty much what you'd expect.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to reimplement it. When there's an open source piece of software right there, you can just take off the shelf and use. The great part about open source.
So I have to ask, since I'm sure people are going to wonder about this, and by people I of course mean me, how different is Valkey from Redis? Is it effectively a one-to-one clone of the exact existing source code at moment of fork, and then effectively reconstituting the exact same governance process, release cadence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or are you taking this opportunity to change things up about it?
We actually are trying to keep as much as possible. There was a couple of major forks in the community that were doing a bunch of little changes, and we sort of took a very strong stance that we want to keep everything as similar as possible. So the official stable release of Valkey is 7.2.5, which is basically a complete fork of Redis 7.2 with a couple of extra compatibility APIs. So Redis, the development tree was actually a good bit ahead of that. There was about another 6-ish months of development. So we also forked all of that, and that's going to go into our Valkey 8 release. So that's sort of the compatibility that we're sort of seeing. And besides that, we kept the governance pretty much the same. In Redis, there's a 5-member core team. We now have a 6-member technical steering committee. We are keeping a lot of the nuances of Redis as the same as well. We plan on continuing to do the even number releases. Redis was sort of known for doing like 6.2, 6.4. We'll also do if we were going to do another 7 release, we would have done 7.4, but we're going to do 8, so we'll probably do 8.2. But we are changing some things. Like, one thing that we added unit tests, which is a kind of a minor, unimportant thing, but it's something that we never had before in open source Redis. But that was one of the things we added. We added a formatter because we finally got sick of people nitpicking, being like, you should put a space here. But we could never get consensus before to add one. So there's some of that type of stuff. And then, the culture of pretty technological being technologically conservative as well. Like we're pushing a lot more into the performance realm than we were kind of before. And we're willing to rethink a lot of the core assumptions about Redis, which I think we weren't willing to do before.
It's always a tricky balance. I'm extraordinarily conservative when it comes to file systems, databases, security, fire safety, the things that are going to have massive repercussions if they go wrong. I'm willing to play around in my dev environment with all kinds of ridiculous nonsense. But when it comes time to, and now my day job, back when I worked at the world's largest asset manager, it's, okay, mistakes on this stuff will absolutely show. Why don't we act like the grown-ups we, at least in my case, pretend to be? So there's always a tricky balancing act, but you can't hold still so long that everything becomes ossified. There are no right answers, just a question of how do you want to be wrong?
Right. I mean, we're still struggling to figure out kind of where is the balance of that, because a lot of people put Redis as that's their main data endpoint for real-time end user applications, where if there's any degradation, it's very obvious that something's wrong. So we're taking that very seriously, but at the same time, other databases are, there's 10 years of innovation, like hash tables and TCP pack, processing and network processing, all that stuff. We really haven't added much to Redis, and we don't want to just sit around. There's other forks of Redis that are also starting to invest in all this technology, and they're going to do it too. So we need to sort of be on top of all of that. So it's hard to balance that. And we're still trying to figure it out. The best defense we have is, get lots of testing. We have a lot of really smart people that we have on the project. And we're really hoping we'll be able to, build a really robust, test suite to make sure everything is still working exactly as it should be, bug compatible. We're really good at not breaking APIs. One of the big things Redis is basically never deprecated APIs. They never removed APIs. And we kind of intend to do the same thing.
That's very Amazonian of you.
I know. Yeah. Never release a new version. Just maintain stuff forever.
Oh, no, I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. It's definitely one of those things that is going to be of significant interest to an awful lot of folks. If people want to keep an eye on it or participate themselves, where's the best place for them to find you?
So yeah, we have, Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow, there's a Valkey.io Twitter. I'm very active on LinkedIn at the moment. There's a lot of updates. You should expect an update in the couple weeks. I mentioned a contributor summit. We're hoping to basically say, hey, here's the 6 to 12 month roadmap for Valkey. It's still a little bit tentative right now. I think in a couple weeks, we'll have hey, this is the thing. And it'll be obvious. You'll find a bunch of posts about it. There'll be a blog post about it. There's officially a blog at Valkey.io. You can also go check out that. That should include a lot of the relevant, up-to-date information. Other than that, GitHub is a great place if you're looking for, the latest release. Yeah, if you're interested in contributing, that's a good place to go as well.
And we will, of course, put links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for spending the time. It was a great conversation.
Madelyn Olson, Valkey maintainer and technical steering committee member. I'm cloud economist Corey Quinn, and this is Screaming in the Cloud. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Whereas if you hated this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice, along with an angry comment in which you replace the title of the episode with your name and claim that you created the episode.